Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club Reads panel. My name is Kate Merlene from Cuyahoga County Public Library, and I'll be your moderator for the panel. The titles on this panel explore the complexities of love, family dynamics, memory and identity, how we reckon with our past, the gift of second chances, and the costs of living a creative life. All are things that your book clubs are going to love to discuss in the coming year. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our panel to join us. Jinwoo Chong, I leave it up to you. Ballantine Books.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Kate.
Welcome. Katie Kitamura, Audition, Riverhead.
Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here.
Karen Russell, The Antidote, Knopf.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Kate.
Welcome. Jessica Soffer, This is a Love Story, Dutton.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Welcome. And Karen Thompson Walker, The Strange Case of Jane O, Random House.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Well, welcome to all of our authors. We have a wonderful panel today. So I'm going to give our authors a chance to give us an overview about their books, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into all of them. We'll start with you, Karen Russell. This is your first novel since Swamplandia, and I know a lot of our librarians were huge fans. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for The Antidote, and why was this the project that led you to return to the novel form?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm actually it's surreal to get to do this panel with these amazing authors and with you, Kate, for this particular book, because I think for a long time, I really sort of felt like, oh, I'm a story writer. That's sort of my identity after Swamplandia. I got this idea while I was finishing that book, and it's about ecological collapse and a collapse of memory during the Dust Bowl drought. So the conceit is that there are these women, prairie witches, who receive deposits of strangers' memories. They leave their heads and enter these women's bodies, sort of like a fleshy insulation system. And all I knew was that it would be about a regional collapse of memory. I think Swamplandia for me was so much about these fantasies that cover up real histories and the kind of dire consequences at every level, right? At an individual level and a societal level. And so this book felt sort of like a continuation. I think Swamplandia really, I used to joke that this book was called Drylandia. That was like my rebound novel forever. And I put it aside. I think I wasn't able really to know how to find my way back into and through it until our global pandemic opened something up for me. I had young children, and I had this strong wish to channel a future world that was not apocalyptic. And to do that, I kind of had to return to the past. So I think in the novel, I needed a big world. It's a polyphonic book, and I think it really toggles between these really intimate experiences among its characters, but also kind of a real panoramic look at what our future could be. So yeah, I think that's my answer. Thanks,
Thank
Kate.
you. It's amazing, and the book is really expansive, and so there's so much to delve into, and we'll continue. Now, Jinwoo, I leave it up to you. There's so many relatable things that I think book clubs are going to love to discuss in this book. Can you set up the premise, and what were the ideas that you wanted to explore with this book?
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you to everyone for coming and to the wonderful panelists as well. I Leave It Up to You is my second book. It is about a young man who kind of wakes up from a freak coma and has learned that he has skipped like the majority of COVID. And his fiance is gone. He is homeless. All of his friends are gone. And he really has no other choice but to reconnect with his family in Fort Lee, New Jersey, from whom he's been estranged for decades, and get back into the Korean Japanese restaurant that they run there. And I wrote it during a really tumultuous period of my life. It reflects a lot of the joy and hope that I wished were in my life at the time. My first novel was kind of struggling to sell to any editor. I was falling out of love with writing. I was kind of disillusioned with the amount of time I'd spent doing everything. At the same time, COVID was happening. And so this book reflects all of the hope that I had towards wanting to like writing again, because I went through a period of my life where I really didn't like it, and I didn't enjoy the exercise of publishing books. And I think I have found it in this book. I enjoyed writing it a lot more than the first one. I enjoy reading it as well, and we'll just see what happens come March.
Well, thank you. And we're so glad that you did, because it is, I think, a joyful book. And I think it's one that, our readers are going to love as well. Karen Thompson Walker, can you tell us what readers will experience from The Strange Case of Jane O?
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you to all of you librarians out there. I'm just so thankful for the work that you do for all of us every day and for our society. Yeah, my new book is called The Strange Case of Jane O. This is my third novel. I also wrote The Age of Miracles and The Dreamers. This one is a book that I think of as a speculative novel or a speculative mystery about memory, motherhood, identity, and love. It's the story of a new mother who is suddenly struck by a series of eerie episodes. So hallucinations, blackouts, an inexplicable sense of dread, and she eventually goes missing. And so it's a book that for me really grows out of my lifelong love of stories about mysterious phenomena and scientific mysteries of all kinds, and especially mysteries about the human brain, and kind of the magic of human consciousness, human memory, and also in a larger sense, the sometimes inexplicable paradoxes of science. So one of my big inspirations for this book was the work of Oliver Sacks, the neurologist and writer who wrote these just really beautiful and profound case histories of people living with rare and kind of extraordinary brain disorders. So he wrote about people who have photographic memories, people who are living in are trapped in a perpetual present because of a memory problem. He wrote about people who hallucinate music. So when I was writing my own book, I kind of started with this one question, which was, what if a doctor like Oliver Sacks were to encounter a patient whose symptoms were so unusual and so extraordinary that they really could not be explained by the usual causes? What if they seemed to him in some way impossible? And I guess I hope it's a book that is for readers of novels like Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro or Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, which are two books that really inspired me and I think maybe exist in some similar psychic territory. And I hope it's just a book for anyone who loves to learn about or has been curious about the more mysterious corners of the human mind.
Thank you. I think that's spot on. So good job. Katie, can you give our audience an overview of what to expect from Audition?
Yeah, of course. And like everybody, I'm so thrilled to be here on this panel with UK and with these writers, all of whom I admire so much. And I also wanted to thank everybody for coming along and making the time to come to the panel. Probably like everybody here, I really grew up in libraries. I mean that kind of literally as a child, and then again as a writer. So the work that you do is so invaluable. It's so vital. I'm really in awe, and I'm very, very grateful. My book Audition opens when a young man, a stranger, tells the narrator, who is a successful actress very much in the middle of her life, that he believes that he is her son. And from that revelation or that claim, a kind of set of parallel competing narratives unfolds. I think I was drawn to the premise because I'm very much interested in the idea that in a single moment, everything you know about yourself and your place in the world can kind of be overturned. What does the aftermath of that look like? What does it do to your relationships with the people that you love? What does it do with your perception and your understanding of yourself? In a lot of ways, that's really what the core of this book is. Although I think, Karen, hearing your description, they might operate on kind of very different islands, but I think there's maybe some shared territory. So I really can't wait to read your book.
Yeah, it's amazing kind of reading all 5 of your books kind of in tandem. They're not strictly the same, but they share a lot of DNA, I think, too. Jessica, this is a love story, and it's really such a beautiful one. I really enjoyed reading it. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write it?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here with all of you. I've read your books for years and it's just a joy. So it's the story of Abe and Jane. Abe is a writer and Jane is an artist. And their kind of 50-year romance with each other, with their professions, with art, and also with New York City, which is where the book takes place. It also includes the perspective of their son, who has a very complicated relationship with love, and also the perspective of a young writer who is naive and kind of has a idyllic version of love in her head that she is yearning for, and she kind of inserts herself into the relationship between Jane and Abe. So it's really a story about love, the love of a partner, of a child, of a friend, of art, of New York City, but it's as much about sort of what love offers as what love sort of takes away and what's sacrificed in any great love. And I think it came from the fact that the things that I love, like I, have dedicated myself to art. I am in a long-term relationship. I have a young child, and also the kind of things that keep me up at night, things like grief and illness and overwhelming fear. So it comes from a very, very personal place. And just kind of on the logistical level, many years ago, I wrote a novel I wrote a short story that chronicled the love between two people from the time that a woman was born until the time that she passes away. And I spent many years trying to write the novel version of that. And eventually I couldn't sell it. It lived in a drawer, continues to live in a drawer. And this feels like maybe the adult version of that story and also the adult version of that novel, hopefully. So here we are, a long time coming.
Thank you. And I think that comes across on the page, for the reader for sure, and like that, I love the personal becomes like the universal in a way, so everybody can really relate. So thank you. So let's circle back to Karen Russell. You mentioned a little bit about this prairie witch and her concept. Can you delve a little bit deeper into the significance of that prairie witch, and how does that conceit really allow you to interrogate some of the darker events of our history?
Yeah, for sure. And it's so fun to hear about other authors' books. I agree that we're drawing from some dream aquifer together here. Um, and similarly feel like librarians are heroes, and that is where we all fledged as aspiring readers and writers. My kids, it's their favorite place now. I worked on this book for so long that I kind of forgot that other people don't know what a prairie witch is. Do you know what I mean? And like that it's like not intuitive. It's not like, Chase Bank. But in this kind of alternate Nebraska, on the Southern Plains where the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression converge. Oh dear. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Fuzzy connection.
You're
Can you
good.
hear me okay, Kate? Okay.
You're good.
Um,
Yeah, go for it.
uh, these sort of women on the margins make their living taking deposits of people's secrets, the things they just can't bear to remember. And that part of it felt maybe like the universal piece to me. I just think I assume, right? We all, as finite mortals here, have chapters of our own histories that are very difficult to return to. And not only the painful parts, right? But like there's moments of kind of excruciating beauty that can bring pain or that can sort of overwhelm a day. It feels too precious for daily reminiscence. So people deposit these secrets in these women. And so one of the focal characters of my book is a prairie witch. She calls herself the Antidote. It's kind of like her branding, I guess, her stage name. And it really let me explore something that I think is often so private. It's so fast moving. It's hard to think and feel through, like under the spell of your name and everyday lighting. And that's kind of like what we exile from waking consciousness just to live a day. Um, and I think one of the lessons of this book for me was that some of these secret shames and sorrows, they feel so private and individual, but in aggregate, they really become a kind of mass denial, a kind of willful amnesia, I've called it to myself settler amnesia, although of course it's a little more conscious and deliberate than amnesia implies. And they really have a role to play in upholding a very dark status quo. A lot of destruction can flow from people's refusal or inability to reckon with this past. So I really was looking, at kind of some colonial violence that we don't often connect to the Dust Bowl. I don't know that all of us, not, I speak for myself really. So, but I had gaps in my own understanding of ecological collapse. I think I connected it to kind of excesses of capitalism. I don't know that the way that I was taught the history of the dispossession of native nations and their citizens was connected to like the Jodes, right, who lose their lands in the 30s, a few generations, after the forced removal of, many thousands of families. So that I think that conceit of kind of like, what is it people can't bear to hold in their own hearts? Who and what do we omit from the stories we tell? What are these enormous collective consequences? This makes the book sound really dire. I mean, I hope it's playful and funny also, but for me, it really was a way to kind of get at a truth that can be so overwhelming.
Thank you. And I think just the, having readers come together and read it and discuss this, a lot of great discussions and powerful discussions will come from that, and kind of the collective reading of it, really brings that to light. And no, it has its light moments too. So it's not super dire. Katie Kitamura, there's a masterful sense of tension that keeps the reader it's kind of like just enough off kilter through the different stations like of your novel. So you're kind of quietly compelled to turn the pages. Can you talk about the process of how you constructed the novel and how you managed to walk this particular line of tension?
Yeah, of course. First of all, Karen, I loved hearing you talk about your book. I just had to burst out and say that was such a pleasure. But in terms of my book, I think I'm really interested in genre. And although I've never written or have yet to write a kind of straight genre novel, I think I'm always borrowing elements from different genre styles. So I feel like I borrowed elements from murder mysteries and thrillers, or my last book, there are kind of a tiny, tiny little bit of a kind of courtroom drama. All of those genre, kind of the propulsion of genre is really interesting to me. And I always try to kind of borrow a little bit of that where I can. And in the case of this novel, I think the genre I found myself thinking about most was actually horror. And of course, the thing about horror is that you're at your most tense and you're most stressed out, not when the kind of so-called monster or whatever it might be finally reveals itself. You're at your most tense when you are waiting, when the characters are waiting and they don't know what they're waiting for. And that kind of place of suspension, which is kind of suspension of knowledge, it's also a kind of temporal suspension. That was really what I was hoping to achieve in some way in this book. So I found myself thinking a lot about what the characters know and what the characters don't know. I found myself thinking about, what they're waiting for, similarly what the reader knows and doesn't know. And some of that is kind of concrete events or concrete knowledge that is revealed over the course of the novel, but I think a lot of it has to do with perception and the unreliability of perception. And so all the time throughout the novel, the characters' own sense of how they see the world is incredibly unreliable, and it is incredibly mutable. It's changing all the time. What I tried to do with this book is also make it so that the reader's perception of the world, of the story, and of the characters is also similarly slippery. And I think that's probably where a lot of the tension, or I hope some of the tension in the book arises.
Thank you. I mean, sometimes when you're just reading it, it's nice to hear kind of how that was put together. Jessica, so your characters are both in creative fields. I think Jane is kind of the one who's more driven to her art of the two, and kind of really encourages Abe's, her husband's success. Could you discuss how each approaches the sacrifices that you mentioned required for their art, and then how this dynamic affects their relationship, particularly when it comes to their son?
Yeah, I love this question. I think the two main characters definitely approach art differently, right? So for Jane, who's the artist, it's her whole life and her whole world, and the way she kind of organizes her emotions and the things that she sees. And for Abe, it's something that he's a writer, and writing is something that he's done for essentially his whole life. And it's what he's good at and certainly what he loves. But I think he's more balanced in it and also in everything. And I think that there are artists that operate in sort of one of two ways, either of those two ways, and probably other ways as well. And when they have their child, Max, Jane's world really does go upside down, and she suffers from postpartum depression. And much of that, I think, has to do with what she feels is compromised in becoming a mother, which is her art. And she can't approach her art in the way that she always did because she can't sort of give it her whole heart. And that kind of wrecks her to the core and makes her do neither one particularly well for a whole number of years, parenthood or creativity. And I think that's how a lot of mothers feel, regardless of their career or their expectations or what they love or they believe themselves to love or believe either of those aspirations will be and look like. And for Abe, it's really different. And I think that it's not really a conversation about gender so much as character. But I'm not sure. I think, it's about the way that we approach things. They approach things differently, the things that we do and the things that we love, and also the things that we sort of come up against and struggle with.
Thank you. And I think, everyone will recognize, being pulled in a number of different directions. And there will be a lot of great conversations from that. Karen Thompson Walker, your story is told from a variety of perspectives, including clinical notes from Jane's psychiatrist and interspersed with her own journal entries, which she writes as letters to her young child. What do you want the reader to learn and experience as we encounter those two voices?
Yeah, sorry, for a second I thought I was muted, but I was a false fear of being muted. Yeah, so this story, like you say, is told in alternating points of view by these two narrators, and one narrator is Dr. Henry Bird, who is a psychiatrist who is somewhat unorthodox and has some kind of personal troubles of his own. And as you say, his sections are they have a sort of a loose case history form. They're documenting his attempts to understand what's going on with Jane's mind. And then the other narrator is Jane herself. And yeah, as you say, her sections are in the form of letters to her one-year-old son. And the reason I chose that for her, that form, is that she's really at this moment of crisis. She feels like she's breaking apart in some way. And so she's has this urge to get down on paper, something for her son, so that if she's not around to explain herself when he's old enough to hear it, he'll have these letters. And I was really interested in using both of these perspectives because I think it was a way of telling the story of what this strange thing that's happening to Jane's mind, to tell it from both the inside and the outside. So obviously, Dr. Bird is drawing on, his knowledge of psychiatry, psychology, neuroscience, and Jane is drawing on just the immediacy of her own firsthand experience. And I think also having the two narrators, something I realized, especially as I got further into the book, was that it opened up all these possibilities for gaps between the two points of view and the way that they talk about what they know and the way that they talk about certain events. There's an element of unreliability in both voices. So it was fun to play with that over the course of the novel. But I hope it also, having the two points of view, like, of course, there is this like storytelling, it's helpful in a kind of storytelling on a storytelling level, but I hope it also reflects something true about just human experience, how we all are kind of working with partial knowledge, especially of one another, but maybe also partial knowledge of reality itself.
Yeah, and I think just the form, as you're reading it, I mean, you really feel that too, and you're not quite like Katie's book. You're not quite sure, who's got the truth. So, Jinwoo, when Jack Jr., your character, awakens from his coma, we as readers really acutely feel his longing for his fiancée Ren. And it's really heartbreaking as we go through it. Could you discuss his connection with Ren and how his absence affects Jack Jr.'s approach to really moving on with his life?
Yes, thank you, Kate. I like this question because it lets me talk about the first chapter of this book, which was the hardest to write, but also the most gratifying. It's the moment that Jack Jr. wakes up and finds that he is very utterly alone. And if you can put yourself in his shoes, you don't know what year it is, nobody's around, all the doctors and the medical staff around you can't really answer your questions, and you're thinking of the person that you would most want to be there. And to go through the process of realizing that person isn't there and for reasons unknown to you, it's a wound that Jack Jr. carries with himself over the course of the entire novel. It influences every decision that he makes because it's something that impedes his ability to move on from the past and to grow. And it was really interesting to work with a character who is not there because we don't really see Ren except in sort of hearsay and what Jack remembers of him until the very end of the book. And I admire fiction that can do a lot with the absence of a character. I'm thinking of the very legendary play, The Boys in the Band by Mark Crowley, which takes place at a birthday party whose guest of honor does not show up until well into the second half of the play. And all of the kinds of things that the characters say about him take on the aspect of the character itself, so that when you finally meet him, there's such a jarring of things that happen, which is what I feel like happens in this book as well. I set out to write a love story. I was trying to experiment with that because my work thus far has not been very happy, and I was hoping to find a little bit of joy there, albeit starting with something very traumatic as what starts at the beginning of this book, but it does have a happy ending, at least. Yeah.
Thank you. And so I just want to mention to our audience that if you want to drop some questions in the chat or comments in the chat, we are looking at that, and we'll save some time at the end for the questions. So just if you have something to say to our authors, please drop it in the chat. So back to you, Karen Thompson Walker. So the novel, as you said, explores a traumatic event that Jane experienced in college and how that may have impacted her current perceptions and mental experiences. What research did you do to accurately portray these experiences? And then how did you decide what to leave in and what to leave out?
Yeah, I did a lot of research. I did much more research than I've ever done before for a novel. I guess for a period of 4 or 5 years, I was just trying to read everything I could about psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy, neuroscience. I mentioned the Oliver Sacks before, but I also read, patient memoirs like An Unquiet Mind by Kay Redfield Jameson, Brain on Fire, which is the more recent memoir. I read memoirs by therapists. I also read a lot of books about memory and memory disorders, different kinds of amnesia. And there was just, you're right, that there's just so much fascinating material out there that it was sometimes hard to decide what to include. And I have still some notes of things that just didn't make it in, like interesting, fascinating anecdotes about say one particular case study that was really interesting, but just wasn't quite relevant enough to include in the book. But yeah, that's one of my favorite things about writing this book, was learning all this stuff about the varieties of people's brains in a way. And it was just a reminder of all the different ways that there are to be human, and a reminder that we don't all experience reality or perceive reality in the same way. And so it's really a story about a woman, about Jane, who it turns out does not experience reality in the same way that most of the rest of us do. So yeah, most of the research that I did was book-based, but when I got to the end of my process, I finally sort of had the nerve to share it with a psychiatrist, because even though the book has a kind of uncanny element, I wanted it to feel really realistic. So I had a kind of acquaintance who's a psychiatrist read it. And she gave me a response that surprised me, but I was so relieved, which she said that the Dr. Bird sections felt as if they were written by a psychiatrist. And she said it was undetectable that they were not written by a psychiatrist, which she found to be like very uncanny. And me too. I did too, although it just was a reminder of like the weirdness of writing fiction. And in a way, it's like being an actor, because I was just so glad to feel that maybe I had done a kind of accurate like impersonation, at least for the length of just this one novel, of a real psychiatrist. So that was nice.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's just the synergy. Sometimes you just don't know. That's amazing. Jessica, in addition to Abe and Jane, we also hear from their son Max, as you said, and a student named Alice. Their unique voices really feel essential to the story. Did these characters always have their own perspectives in the book, or, how did you decide which characters' viewpoints to include?
It's such an astute question, and sort of is at the source of why this book took so very long to write. So originally, for many years, I worked with just Abe and Jane as the two characters in the book, and I really thought that it would be this very niche, very short, very insular novel, and a real study of a marriage, but it didn't work, and it felt kind of exclusive and sort of limiting in really bad ways. And a friend who read it said, it feels like it's just one part of a love story. And that's when I started thinking about how every love story is sort of reliant on many other relationships and many other loves, and is really just one part of a whole. And so that's when I brought in the perspective of their son, who really complicates their relationships, Abe and Jane's relationships with themselves, but also with each other. And then I also brought in this young student who is desperate to have this kind of love story of her own, and really calls in everything to question for both Jane and for Abe. And so all the perspectives in the book really kind of tie back into love, but not only the kind of good parts of love, but the conflict parts of love. And in the end, I'm really glad that these other perspectives came up, because they were a joy to write. They were much, I don't want to say easier than the Abe and Jane sections, but they came more naturally, I think, because they were essential. And I think they themselves are essential to the kind of nuclear connection at the heart of the book.
Thank you. So Karen Russell, readers are going to love discussing these multiple characters. Can you talk a little bit about your process of developing them? And do you have a favorite that you wrote?
Thank you, Kate. It's really a joy to get to hear from everybody. And I love that question because I sort of love them all. I wish Oliver Sacks would write about whatever Doppler authors experience as like their characters are departing the harbor for other consciousnesses. I really miss them. It's interesting because there were times where I was like, I want to be rid of you dusty people, but now I miss them a lot. I loved writing this witch. I think, there's a loss that was dynamited through her. She was a teen mother, and her baby was taken from her at this home for unwed mothers. And in my mind, all of these women who kind of rent out this spaciousness, to store strangers' memories, there's always some powerful loss that kind of is ongoing that opened that space up. So I really, that I cared for her a lot. It's interesting. I really do think there's some shaded part of the event for all of the books we're discussing. There, she has her address is kind of to this son who she doesn't know if he's alive or where he is, and so she's sort of always kind of dialoguing with this, maybe phantom. I mean, she really doesn't know for most of this novel. She's a childless mother, and then I really loved writing this like feral young daughter of a murdered mother who's so angry. She's the captain of this basketball team that's like playing even though it's like they're, scoured by dust. She also decides she'll be the witch's apprentice. And when this sort of bankruptcy of memory happens, this prairie witch loses all the memories. This like, I don't know, this kind of scrappy, her name is Asphodel. And she's like, I'll counterfeit some memories for you for this town. And I mean, it goes very poorly. Feel like the trajectory of most fiction is it like good to better? No, it's bad to worse. for most of the book. But I loved those two, the childless mother and the motherless child. And I really I was surprised to meet this. She's a photographer. I bet a lot of people are familiar with Migrant Mother and, Fleeing a Dust Storm, these iconic photos of the Dust Bowl drought. There was that unprecedented state-sponsored documentary project, and, Gordon Parks, Dorothea Lange, these Walker Evans, going around to introduce America to Americans. This photographer gets sent from Pennsylvania out to sort of document poor white tenant farmers. And it was both to kind of document the need for these relief programs, the New Deal, but also as propaganda, sort of this existential imperative to prop it up. And she heads out there and finds this kind of time traveling camera. Her camera goes rogue and it starts making pictures of the distant future, the remote past, like yesterday, tomorrow, things she hasn't really been sent to see. And I loved that character. She was a real surprise when she showed up. There's a cat. I love the cat.
The cat. Thank
Thank
you.
God that cat came. Things were really feeling truly dire, and then the cat kind of sauntered.
Thank you very much. Katie, the actress in the audition, she kind of faces this extreme self-doubt while trying to find her performance. There's a very particular scene. Can you talk about what the scene means for her and how it functions in the novel?
Yeah, of course. I love this question. Thank you so much, Kate. I mean, the novel is about actors, but I think it's also about the parts that all of us play every day, whether or not we're professional actors. I think every day I'm playing a whole host of roles. I'm a kind of mother, I'm a spouse, I'm a teacher. Occasionally, I think I'm a writer. And, each of those roles they come with quite clearly defined parameters and even scripts to a certain extent. And, I kind of seamlessly flip back and forth between them without really even being aware of it. In the scene that you mentioned, the central character has a sense that she can no longer grasp the role that she's meant to play, the role that she's been told to play. The kind of something about it is eluding her. And that, of course, is in reference to the actual play that she's in rehearsal for, but it's also a kind of refers in a larger sense to her whole sense of the architecture of her personality and her identity, which is starting to kind of tremble around her. And it's quite an important scene because it's at that moment that there's a hinge in the book and it leads up to that hinge. And it's just that moment when the mask slips and what happens when you see yourself as a kind of creature of artificial parts that you've been putting together and turning into an identity. What happens when you can see that artifice? Then how are you able to relate to yourself and your own experiences? And so, it is through this maybe hyper is not, but this kind of very extreme version because she is an actor. But I think it's something that probably all of us have encountered at one time or another in our lives.
Thank you. Love that. Jinwoo, culinary and cultural traditions play a significant role in the novel. Some of the most memorable scenes are in the family restaurant or during the 4 a.m. fish runs. How does that setting enable you to explore the various dynamics within this family?
Thank you, Kate. So I watch too much television, and from it, the past few years, we've gotten shows like The Bear. There's reality TV like Chopped and Hell's Kitchen, and if you watch any of those, you'll get a sense for what it's like in a kitchen of a restaurant, and it is utter chaos. There's like boundaries being pushed, the people cursing all over the place. There is just no sense of peace at all. And of course, it all happens behind a closed door so that the guest never knows. And yet, the meal that a restaurant staff cooks for itself before beginning the service is called family meal. And it felt like a metaphor that just fell very cleanly and conveniently into my lap. And to set this book in a restaurant like that felt really appropriate for the kind of turmoil that this family of Jack Jr.'s is going through. And you add in on top of that the idea of the craft of sushi and sushi making, which is extremely disciplined. It's as much an art form as it is a science. I'm reminded of, I know everyone's seen Jiro Dreams of Sushi, but there is a moment in it where one of Jiro's apprentices, Daisuke Nakazawa, said that he tried to make the egg custard, tamagoyaki, for close to a decade and never got it right. And then when finally Jiro Ono said, this one is okay, he broke down in tears in the kitchen. And I feel like that is a very, very kind of succinct picture of what it's like behind the bar of a sushi restaurant that felt really, really amazing to put a family inside, because then now when you're thinking about this being a small business, there's money involved, there is no sense of privacy, there's this heightened stress of figuring out when the next paycheck will happen, when rent can be paid, all of those things get combined into one. And when you're running a small business, when you're in charge of a restaurant like that, there are no boundaries between any of those different lives that people have. And it felt like the perfect mess to put this very kind of this family that I feel sorry for sometimes. It felt like the perfect mess to put this family inside. And I had a lot of fun doing it. The restaurant and the food scenes are absolutely my favorite parts of the novel, because I didn't do research in the sense of reading books. I just ate a lot and ate out a lot. And it was honestly my kind of research. I would love to I'd love to find inspiration like that again.
Isn't that the best kind of research?
Yeah.
So we have our last round of questions, and just briefly, we have about 8 minutes left. I'm gonna ask Jessica about Central Park. It has its own chapters in the novel, and it often serves as the backdrop for some of the events in your characters' lives. What inspires you about Central Park, and why did you give it its own voice? You're muted.
I'm so sorry. The characters really do weave in and out of Central Park in various moments of their lives, in good moments and bad moments. And there are full sections from the perspective of Central Park, and it sort of gives voice to everyone in the park. So the dogs, the dog walkers, the hot dog vendors, the tourists, the locals, really everybody. I grew up near Central Park. My father was an artist. He used to sit in the park and just be quiet and observe. And I learned to observe there, which of course is the writer's most necessary and vital tool. And so it was there that I kind of learned everything I know about human nature. And so when I started thinking about what an expansive love story would look like, I felt like this was the place that taught me everything. And I sort of not wanted to give back to it, but wanted to honor it in some way. And writing those sections were by far the most invigorating moments that I had during the writing process. Hopefully that shows on the page, but who knows?
Absolutely, it does feel like an homage, and even if you're not from New York City, like you can feel it, I think.
Thank you.
So Karen Russell, the Antidote as a title works on a few different levels here. What does the title mean to you, and at what point in the process did you decide on it?
Oh, thank you, Kate. I think I had a lot of really terrible I mean, Drylandia was not going to be the real title, thank God. It took me a while, and I think, you know, it was her name pretty early on. I think I got that image of this woman with this ear horn swallowing the past in, like, I don't even know. I won't even tell you. It like a lifetime ago. What I like about it is, on the one, I'm so happy it reads to you as sort of tonally complex, because for me, you know, there's some very dark humor to it. This woman advertising oblivion as a cure-all for, like, gas pains, nightmares, everything that ails you, really. You know, she's like, just pour it all into me. I'm the antidote for whatever ails you. Kind of selling her own, she's like, you know, a traumatized woman selling her own oblivion as a kind of medicine. And as I mentioned, it just doesn't work. And I think that idea of, like, whatever temporary peace you gain from that sort of willful forgetting, you know, you pay for with the poisoning of every aspect of your life, but all life, right? Really. And that, so that's inside the book. I think depending on how the distance from the canvas, it feels comic and tragic to me both. And then, of course, you know, although there is no panacea in this book, right? I hope people don't read it like the way everyone bought The Secret, like, because there really isn't any one antidote available here. But I really did try to channel visions of what could be, and I did that with help from a lot of people, different climate activists, native historians, dreamers. A lot of different voices and visions are woven into this book. So I do sort of hope it's an aquifer that feels sincerely hopeful. It was for me writing it. As Jessica said, I mean, I hope I transferred some of the real hope I felt into this book. And I love that Octavia Butler quote about how there's no magic bullet, right? There's 1,000 solutions and you can be one of them.
Absolutely. Thank you. Karen Thompson Walker. So your novels kind of build as a literary puzzle, and there's a twist at the end, and it was completely unexpected for me, and I'm usually pretty good about that. So without revealing any spoilers, could you share if you've always had that particular ending in mind, or did you have other possibilities?
Yeah, I like the idea that people feel like it feels like a literary puzzle. I like that thinking. I mean, at the same time, I really hope it feels organic. It's really important to me in storytelling. I mean, as a reader, but also as a writer, for it to feel like, yeah, that the turns of the story grow out of like a certain logic, even if it's not apparent as you're reading it. I mean the like seeds of the logic. Yeah, I think I think of it as a sort of like, over the course of the novel, the reader comes to understand something surprising that they couldn't possibly perceive at the start. Even though there's like sort of little, not clues, you're not meant to understand it, but it's been seeded, hopefully. But yeah, I like that effect as a reader. And I'm always interested in stories where something is not exactly as it seems. I did not always know exactly how it would end. I really began but I think I always knew, like I said, it would be in some way not exactly as things first seem. I really began this book by writing the first scene was the first thing that I wrote, and I wrote it when I was still working on my last book and sort of set it aside until I was ready to go back to it. But the first scene it's from the perspective of the psychiatrist, and a woman he's never met before shows up for an appointment. She clearly seems to be in some kind of distress, but she won't or can't explain herself. All she will say about it is that something strange happened to her. And then after a few minutes of basically silence while he's waiting for her to explain, she changes her mind, gets up, and rushes out of the office. And so the whole book, like the actual book, begins with that scene, but also this whole story for me began with that scene. And I didn't always know what her troubles were, what the issue was, but it was fascinating to kind of figure out what's really going on with her and what are the implications. And I hope that that's mirrored in the reading experience.
Thank you. We just got a couple of minutes left. I'd like Jinwoo to address your title. What does it mean to you, and when did you decide on it?
Yes. Okay, so I Leave It Up to You was not the original title when I was writing it. It was originally called Jack Jr. Wakes Up. And when I was thinking about, I was talking with my editor, Jesse Schumann, on this when we were working through the entire manuscript. And the realization that we came to was that that's not actually what happens in the book. Waking up is a very solitary kind of thing. You just kind of do it. It's very natural. When in fact, the only reason that Jack Jr. succeeds at all through this book is because of the people around him, and the people whose love that he eventually learns to receive and to give back. Omikaze in Japanese translates kind of roughly to "I leave it up to you," and it's what a customer at a sushi restaurant would usually tell the chef, as if to say, my meal is in your hands. I trust you to feed me, to nourish me. And I find that so beautiful that and the fact that that happens just like it's a term for food is a really amazing thing. And I think that it's a much more succinct kind of image of what Jack Jr. learns to do to kind of cede control of his life towards other people, to let other people in. And when I admit, when I saw it, I realized it was a much better title than the one that I had originally. So I have a really, really good editor for that reason.
That helps. Thank you. And we'll end with you, Katie Kitamura. So I know when my book club is going to discuss this, someone will ask, okay, so what really happened? You know, like I have the answer. I believe there could be several interpretations. And how do you approach leaving the reader with multiple possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a book that I hope has at least several different interpretations, some of which are contradictory, but which I hope kind of sit alongside each other in an interesting way to form a kind of psychological portrait of this quite fractured and fragmented psyche. At some point in the novel, the central character, who's an actor, says that a performance is made in the space between the audience and the actors in a kind of space of interpretation. And I think that's when I wrote that, I was really writing about a novel. And I think that's true of all novels. And I really, really wanted it to be true of this novel. And so when I was writing, I was mostly thinking about how to make the book capacious enough so that there was a lot of space for the reader, so that there was a kind of, I don't know, I thought of it as like trying to invite the reader in and having the reader make the book alongside me. I mean, it's kind of like my omakase to the reader in a lot of ways. I think it's a book that is made by the reader more than me. And so that's it, I hope it comes with that kind of spirit of openness.
Well, that's wonderful. And I love that we're ending with the reader. And this panel has been amazing, and just, all the synergy around it. I want to thank our speakers for this fantastic discussion. Thanks to all the librarians who joined us today. Next, we have 4 concurrent sessions. We have Stories Across Time, Big Books from Small Presses, Young Adult and Young Readers, and Powerful Listening Experiences, Audio Originals, and Audio First, Part 1 and 2. Have a wonderful afternoon.